Welcome back to the 480 podcast. I'm Jacob Fredericks, and in today's episode, we're going to discuss the Cardinals' really bad loss to the Seattle Seahawks this past week. So I think really what came down to their 16-6 loss was, first of all, the offensive line was absolutely atrocious this week. 5 sacks allowed. This is what the concern was for the Cardinals going into the year, and they actually performed a little bit better throughout the year than I thought they would have. But I think really I thought it was a mistake bringing Jonah Williams in right back, replacing Kelvin Beachum. Kelvin Beachum was one of the highest rated offensive linemen before he got benched again for Jonah Williams coming back from injury, which is great. But I think keeping Beachum in there while he's playing well would have been a little bit helpful. It wasn't just because of that. The entire offensive line was not good. Paris Johnson got beat a few times. Jonah Williams got beat a few times inside, especially. There was one specific play, I think it was in the third quarter, where he absolutely got bull rushed, and Murray just had no chance to get the ball out. So I really think that if the Cardinals can improve that offensive line, that this game could have gone a little bit differently. Because realistically, the Cardinals had more yards than the Seahawks on offense. They only had 2 less first downs, so it's a pretty close game if you look at it. 65 rush yards given up, that's you can live with that, especially since I've been talking about how the Cardinals' front four is probably the Cardinals' weakest point. And the Cardinals' front four, once again, and the linebackers stepped up again against a pretty good Seahawks offense. Kenneth Walker is one of the top running backs in the league. So keeping him to 65 yards, very good. And again, they only allowed 1 offensive touchdown. Only allowing 1 touchdown in a game, and especially in a division game, usually is a recipe for success for a team, and usually you end up in the win column. But because of a few things, including that offensive line, I think the offensive line on the offensive side, which is where the Cardinals really struggled in this game, was the biggest problem for them. And if they don't improve that going into these next few weeks, they're going to find themselves on the outside looking in the division and in the playoffs. And again, it really just, and other than the offensive line, it really just comes down to some execution on the offense. So assuming the O-line can help, still, Kyler Murray had an okay game, but he just didn't execute at a quite high level. He had 18 rushing yards. That was our leading rusher, Trey Benson, the leading rusher for the Cardinals, 18 rushing yards. That's not executing on offense. As I said, the O-line on the pass protection was probably the biggest weakness. But 18 rushing yards for your leading rusher, that's not good enough. And if Kyler's not able to get the ball down the field through the air, especially with some of those weathering conditions in Seattle, you're going to have to utilize his legs in a case. And the Cardinals didn't do that on offense. And I think some of this execution stuff comes down to coaching. Like they had not other than like the pick 6, that's completely on Kyler Murray on 4th and 1, but it was not a good play call either. I don't really understand that play call on 4th and 1, trying to force the ball down the field to Michael Wilson, and it just got picked off. But it's not just a play calling, it's poor execution on 3rd down, really poor execution. 3 for 12 on 3rd down. 3 for 12 on 3rd down is the exact reason why this team could not get themselves in the game. And I've seen this a lot before. I've done a lot of commentary for some high school football this year, and that's what I've seen in high school football, is teams will drive down the field, they'll get a drive going, get to the 50-yard line, even get to the opponent's 40-yard line, take a penalty or take a sack, and set themselves behind the chains, and it kills drives. And that's what happened to the Cardinals in this game. And if again, they're going to have to clean it up soon because they have a very, very tough opponent coming up in Minnesota this week. Some positives for this game. I mean, I discussed a few of them. The Cardinals' defense obviously was probably the biggest positive for the whole game. I mean, holding Seattle to 16 points and 7 of those points, or 6 of those points being on a pick 6 thrown by Kyler Murray. You can live with that every day, every single game. If the Cardinals' defense can play like that, they're playing extremely well. So, which is, I don't want to say it's a surprise because Nick Rawls is a very good coach, Jonathan Gannon, very good defensive mind. But for the kind of talent they had, they're a step ahead of where they should be on that defensive side. And then on the offensive side, there was only one real positive, and that's Trey McBride, showing once again why he is a top tight end in the league. And I think you can make an argument for once Kelsey retires, for him being the top tight end in the league. He'll be in the debate with Brock Bowers for a long time coming. And so let's move on to preview the game against the Minnesota Vikings next week as the Cardinals travel to Minnesota. And I think the Cardinals on the offensive side are going to have once again a tough time, especially since they had a tough time running the ball against Seattle. Minnesota is second against fantasy running backs in giving up points. They are second best against running backs, at least when it comes to fantasy wise. So it's a little bit different, but overall, if you're not giving up a lot of points, fantasy points to running backs, usually that means those running backs aren't having much success. And so the Cardinals are really going to have to figure something out, maybe design some different runs. You have to use Kyler Murray's leg, maybe even get Marvin Harrison Jr. or Greg Dortch involved on some jet sweeps. Got to have something to throw the Minnesota Vikings off and to open up some of that run game with James Conner. And they're 8th against the tight end, so Trey McBride may not be the option to go to in this game. You're going to have to find the way to get Marvin Harrison Jr. the ball. In the last episode, I talked about how Marvin Harrison Jr. hasn't had as bad of a season as a lot of people said. They just have to get him the ball. And the Cardinals, what the Cardinals do, they did not get him the ball this week, and it resulted in a loss. I think almost all 5 of their losses, Marvin Harrison Jr. was not involved enough in any of them. And I'm not saying that's the only reason that they lost, but there's starting to be a little bit of a correlation is if you don't get your best weapon involved, then you're not going to have a lot of success on offense. So I think that the Cardinals need to focus on getting him the ball a lot more. And then on the defensive side, to preview the Vikings a little bit, I mean, they're going to have a very tough test with all the weapons on this Vikings offense. Justin Jefferson, he's pretty good. I think he's going to have a good day in general. But if you can limit everyone else from having a good day, so Aaron Jones, T.J. Hawkinson, we know the Cardinals in the past have had trouble covering tight ends. So Hawkinson has been on a roll. Jordan Addison had a really, really good game last week for Minnesota. So this Cardinals secondary is going to have one of the toughest games they play. And the Cardinals rush defense, especially that inside 4, Darius Robinson is on track to play as of today. So hopefully he can add something to that Cardinals rush defense and maybe even that pass rush to get to Sam Darnold. And to talk about Sam Darnold for a second, I think that's probably the Vikings' weakest point on offense is the quarterback play. I mean, they've struggled against a couple teams who are records are not great. They struggled against Jacksonville to score points. They struggled against Tennessee to score points. So this Vikings team has struggled against defenses who are really physical, really good up front. And so if the Cardinals can get a little bit of boost on that defensive front, they may be able to hold Minnesota to a very, very low-scoring game. And hopefully the offense can get it going, get Marvin Harrison Jr. involved, get James Conner more involved, and get Kyler Murray more involved, especially with his legs. And so if the Cardinals can do that, I think they can come out on top. It's going to be a very tough task against one of the top teams in the NFC. And so that wraps up this week's episode of the 480 podcast. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. This is Jacob Fredericks, and I'll see you guys next week.